Famously, she was not for turning, survived on 5 to 6 hours sleep each night, found eating a burdensome necessity, didn't comprehend many jokes, and left a slew of European leaders trembling in her considerable wake. Having just celebrated, it's been 40 years since Margaret Thatcher came to power, and as US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo referenced it in his speech this week, it's starkly obvious how much we miss her unique determination and single-minded purpose. It was to save this nation. While noting the stubbornness that was to be part of her undoing, think poll tax, and some policies were calamitously ill-advised, selling off school playing fields, this was a woman from a different political age. Today, when faced with a crisis, our politicians ponder what they should say. In her days, it was simply a question of what she would do. A poll last week showed the public see her as the nation's greatest post-war leader, beating even Winston Churchill. Under her, we'd have Brexited within months of the referendum. So how shall we remember her? For me, with a mixture of awe and longing.
This is such a fascinating example of rewriting history. First of all, she would not have been pro-Brexit. Thatcher was anti-referenda,
for sure,
and she believed in renegotiating our position in Europe, not leaving it. So the way that Brexiteers are casting her as some kind of Brexit icon is incredibly ironic to me.
She would have carried out the wishes of the referendum.
She wouldn't have had a referendum in the first place.
Let's not get hung up on that.
And that's just about where me praising her ends, I'm afraid, because I don't even know where to start. We are living her legacy in so many negative ways. Whether you take the complete calamity of government at the moment, she is the first leader to destroy collective responsibility in cabinet government in this country. She took the post-war consensus about social justice and the welfare state and began dismantling it, and we're still seeing the consequences today in the crisis in housing. She began that by selling off council houses with no plan as to how to replace the stock that low-income families would badly need. Yes, I agree that privatisation has brought wealth into London as a financial centre in the world. I agree that that is part of her legacy, but the cost of that has been inequality levels that are among the highest in Europe. And the idea of allowing deindustrialisation to completely decimate northern communities with no plan as to how they could become viable economic centres in the future. People are living with the legacy of that today. And, you know, when we look at Brexit, I've never been dismissive about the very legitimate grievances people in Brexit heartlands have. Feeling left behind, feeling that there's no plan for them, feeling that they are not sharing in the growth in wealth in this country. But the reason for that is not Europe. The reason starts with Thatcher's policy, and it's still continuing today.
I can counter that. Let's get Majid in. I'm not being cheeky. You probably weren't even a school... Were you a schoolboy?
I was a schoolboy.
Trying to do your homework.
I had my milk snatched.
OK, OK. So you were possibly trying to do your homework when the lights went out at 10:30 at night.
Well, I remember those days. I remember I was born in '77, and I've got to say, to balance out some of what Afua said, there are pros to Thatcher's premiership, and the fact that she was a 3-time winner. We've only had 2 prime ministers in my lifetime that have done that, Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher. And so for me, transcending above some of the legitimate criticism that Afua raises is recognising in what you said that we are today suffering sorely from a lack of leadership. And I wish we had a leader, either like Tony Blair minus Iraq, and say Thatcher minus perhaps the housing crisis and a few other things that Afua mentioned, that showed leadership in these difficult times and showed us what statesman or womanship really should look like. And that's where I do agree that that kind of quality perhaps today is in short supply.
Michelle, credit to you. You put your head above the parapet. You actually run for election. You tried to get into politics, and you fared well, and good luck to you. Were you in any way inspired by Mrs. Thatcher?
Well, I think Margaret Thatcher, like anybody, there's good and there's bad, but undeniably, and I'd be interested in your take on this, undeniably, as a woman, you've just done a debate about how politics is sexist and all the rest of it, and how wives are there as trophies. And there is a lady 40 years ago who was the first Prime Minister. Is there any part of you that feels inspired by her in that way?
It's interesting, because I was born during Thatcher's time, and it did something to my psyche that the Prime Minister was a woman. I'll give her that. I think, but for me, it also reveals that the limits to what a woman can represent. I think it's good that we had a female Prime Minister, but she didn't inspire me because her policies were destructive for women. And actually, just to quickly, and I know you're in the middle of speaking, but if you look at what men were paid and the gap, the gender pay gap when she came into power, which was 66p that men earned more than women. When she left power in 1990, it was £1.62, and that's just one of many examples of how her policy. She was a woman who didn't leave a legacy that necessarily empowered other women, and I think it is important to say there was a symbolism for me of having a woman in power, but that doesn't mean that she made things better for women.
I'm guessing you were a Thatcher's child as well, in as much as you were born during her.
Yeah, and which is why 1997 was one of the best days of my life, in that, you know, all I'd ever known was
won, right?
Tory.
This is when Tony Blair won, I'm assuming.
Exactly. I have to say, I think one of the best days in British politics was the day Margaret Thatcher was booted out of office.
Tell me
and
why.
one of the worst was when she became leader. I'll tell you why. I agree that, yes, as a woman, it was wonderful to have a strong woman in a position of power who was very confident about her power. But in terms of what she did to this country, this is a woman who called Nelson Mandela a terrorist.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I will say that.
Yeah.
This is a woman who did so much to actually divide our country, in the sense that she was not somebody that was about unifying Britain. What she was about was making sure that Britain continued to be a country that was one that wasn't about being part of a proper global community. And also what she did, don't forget, in terms of our class system, considering that she was a working class woman herself, she did nothing to dismantle our class system. She was somebody that was actually in support of it. So for me to be inspired by Margaret Thatcher? No way.
But
I respect her as a powerful woman.
It is, but let's just, and of course, but probably every leader has said something dopey, and I'm not supporting what she said.
But the problem here is what was going on in South Africa at that time.
I don't think, Magic maybe a bit. None of you realise the parlous state in which this country was when she came to power.
I accept that.
Not the sick man of Europe, it was arguably one of the sick men of the world. We were on a 4-day week, the lights went out at night. I've been doing my homework by candle. Rubbish, and you couldn't bury the...
Which was a Labour government.
Please let me finish.
Yeah.
Inflation running at 25%. The value, mortgages, I mean, it wasn't quite Venezuela, but it was headed that way.
I just about remember that, Nick, and I do concede that.
So my mum literally would go to the shops, and the prices had gone up from week to week of a price of beans and a loaf of bread. That was how it was. The trade unions weren't, quotes, running the country. Not quite, but they certainly had more power than the government did. One final thing. In her time, she righted that. I cannot begin to describe how bad... You don't put a ship right unless you take some drastic action.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
One of the people that she most admired, and that's the person that she based her economic model on, that's what Thatcherism is based on, is the economist Friedrich von Hayek. Now, do you not accept that his policies have been horrendous for the working class? Like, if we look at...
No.
Yes!
No.
Yes.
Allowing them to buy their own houses.
If you look at the neocon movement in America, if you look at here, it's the same economic model, and it's done nothing for the poor.
Working class people buying their own council houses is emancipation.
But look what's happened now.
I remember, just about remember the days you referred to, and I would like to concede that they were terrible, dark days in this country.
They really were dark. You turned the lights on.
They were actually physically dark, and they were also, I mean, we were living in a cold and blighted country, and it was miserable. And I remember... Because, as I said, I was 77, I remember vividly Thatcher changing some of that and some of the conflict around her changing some of that, right? I would say that actually, even when it comes to home ownership, though it has caused the current housing crisis, I do concede that.
Agree.
It did, though, for an entire generation of working class people, including my family, allow them to become homeowners and therefore become kings or queens of their own castles. And that, psychologically, is truly significant because it led to a shift in expectations of what you can aspire to.
But then isn't the failing the forward planning? So it's one thing giving you the opportunity to buy a home, which is great, but if you're not thinking, you know...
So it's a mixed bag.
And also...
But on one hand, giving people the opportunity to buy a home, and then back to Afua's point in terms of what she did to the northern mining communities, completely decimating the ability for those people to provide for themselves for generations.
I think it's costing more to get the coal out the ground than the coal was worth.
Yeah, but
I'm not saying that means you make everyone unemployed.
But we have to agree it's a mixed bag, though, because June, I'm sure, like, I would, you know, I think Tony Blair is one of the great leaders of this country, except the Iraq War. And this is why I'm saying it depends on who you ask, because if you go to Iraq, they would probably love Thatcher more than Tony Blair because of the destruction that has been, you know, basically let loose in that country.
That's damaged our reputation on the world stage.
Pledges, what I want to do now, post-war, because I appreciate we might not be up for Winston Churchill, I'd like you all to think about who your favourite post-war Prime Minister might be, and I'm going for...
Hang on, I didn't know post-war was a condition.
Yeah, I know, same.
No one told me that. But I can explain who this is.
Yes, do. Explain, Majid, you go first.
Right, well, this is Charles Grey, and the tea Earl Grey's named after him. And the reason I picked him is because he abolished slavery and was a great reformer, and we need reform today. He reformed the electoral system.
Well, I chose Nick.
As a baby.
Yeah, no, I'm in joking. I didn't pay attention to the brief and didn't realise it was post-war either. So I chose Churchill purely and simply because I really think we need, as well, yes.
He was the better during the war.
Leadership.
Jim Sarpong.
I went with Tony Blair.
No surprise.
Yeah, minus Iraq.
Yeah. Minus Iraq.
Clement Attlee, architect of the welfare state, socialist, and had fewer than a quarter of his cabinet private school educated.
Well, faces down, we must face, we must move on, because while many of us were getting merry to celebrate the extra long bank holiday weekend, one couple had a very good reason for cracking open a bottle of Frogmore's finest champagne. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex welcomed their first child, a boy, on Monday morning. Celebrities and world leaders rushed to congratulate Harry and Meghan on social media, while in their hometown of Windsor, royal fans were more than a little bit excited over the new arrival. Here's how some of them reacted to the happy news.
Is this a sort of particularly special royal baby, do you think?
Not really.
So you heard she's gone into labour?
I didn't hear anything. We've just been waiting all day and we've just heard now.
And so how long do you think it's going to take?
I've no idea. I've never been in labour. I've only voted Labour. Oh, it's fantastic news. Really is. Wonderful news. This is what Britain needed today. Yes. This is what we've been needing. I'm sick to death of Brexit. So let's have something to celebrate. Yes, good news.
I didn't know Carol Malone was in Windsor. I think it's safe to say royal baby mania has reached fever pitch. And for that, enthusiastic welcome to baby Archie Harrison, Mountbatten, Windsor. People of Great Britain, you are our straight talkers of the week.